Fallout 76 just got news of its first real DLC content, that in the form of a brand new game mode or even server coming to the game. This has been dubbed survival servers by Bethesda, and honestly, in effect, it's just PvP servers, or even hardcore servers to an extent. In this video, we're going to be taking a pretty close look at that, but in addition, there's some other stuff to look at, such as details on the next patch, as well as an update as to how some dupers are seemingly getting unbanned. If you guys do enjoy the content, you can leave a like or subscribe. I know some of you are going to have questions like, hey, didn't you upload this video? And no, technically this is a recreation of that video, and I'll explain why at the end of this one for those of you that care and want to stick around. But either way, starting things off, we do have this brand new survival mode. It was announced just yesterday in the latest Inside the Vault article, as well as again, some new details about the up and coming patch. And in effect, what this new mode is going to be is a PvP server. I think that's the simplest way to actually explain it. Now, when you actually go to play the game, there's going to be two options. You can either go for the adventure mode, which is what we have right now, or alternatively, you'll have this new survival mode. And as we go over some of the details of this, there's something pretty interesting about it, or really two specific things. First and foremost, Bethesda says, we're still hard at work on this mode internally and plan to bring it to the live game in phases, as we add more content and features over time. Here's a preview of what you can expect from survival when phase 1 opens for beta testing. So I think those are two pretty interesting pieces of information. First and foremost, this is the beta of survival mode, which is kind of echoed all throughout this article, but even further, the fact that it's coming in phases, which I'll get more into in a moment. So the vast majority of gameplay on survival mode servers is the same events, the same quests, the major difference being that if somebody's not doing an event with you or not presently on your team, they will be hostile to you automatically. That slap system from Fallout 76's adventure mode will be gone. You could just attack them for full damage or vice versa. But that's actually not the only change. That's one of the most prominent. It'll probably have the biggest effect on gameplay. But even further, they're actually adding in several other things to even spice this mode up further. They also mention how they're going to be experimenting with some of the game rules, such as death mechanics. So some of the things you can't do are actually 1, seek revenge. In Fallout 76's present mode, when you die, you can actually seek revenge on somebody. You'll get a higher cap reward, and PvP will just be fully open between the two of you. In this new survival mode, that will be fully removed, but even further, when you actually die, the only places you can choose to respawn are your camp or Vault 76. They go on to say that death in this game isn't just going to be a loss of your caps or your junk, but even further, you're actually going to potentially lose some aid items. I actually really like that. I feel like aid items are a good middle ground where they're very valuable, but at the same time, you won't be devastated if you lose a couple. Although, of course, repeated death certainly could become a nuisance. And then finally, you're actually going to get double the cap reward for killing another player in this mode. So that's effectively the gist of the new gameplay changes, but they're actually adding in an additional tertiary feature, and that's going to be leaderboards. So now there are going to be leaderboards for you and your friends, as well as the people presently on the same server as you. They don't explicitly say what's going to be tracked by these leaderboards, but you just have to imagine kill-death ratios, maybe how much damage you've done, how much damage you received, interesting things like that. In this article, they only mention for your present server and for your friends list. In the future, I think it'd be pretty cool to see things like everyone, just a global leaderboard even across various consoles, although you have to imagine whoever ends up being at the top of that was probably a cheater. But then that brings us to two of the more negative aspects of this new mode that they mention. First and foremost, it's not coming until March. They don't mention a certain time within March, and even further on a Reddit post, they say right now they're looking to start in March, but it could shift based on how they get certain features to work or how much testing is required. They mention how it's starting in beta, but it seems like it's going to just be an open beta. There's no exclusive list of people that will get in first, like with regular Fallout 76. But even beyond that, one of the other features of this that has come under a lot of discussion and really controversy is actually that characters will carry over. So as it stands right now, a character you do have in the adventure mode of Fallout 76 will be totally usable in the survival mode. Following this news, there were numerous Reddit threads talking about this, and I wouldn't be shocked if Bethesda changes this, because one of the Bethesda community managers responds to one of the threads by saying, the article mentions this already, but I want to restate the fact that we're still iterating and actively working on survival mode, so things aren't necessarily set in stone, and your continued feedback will be very important as we move towards beta and eventual release. And they actually echoed the same not set in stone message on the official Fallout Twitter account, so to me that reads like, alright, they're probably listening and they'll probably do something about this. One of the reasons this is such a big issue is if you play Fallout 76 right now and you allow people to use their current characters, there's going to be a lot of exploited weapons in there and a lot of very powerful weapons. You'll have things like two-shot explosives, which if you play the game, let's say you go to a Scorch Beast Queen, you'll see a lot of people have those. They're not nearly as rare as they probably should be, and if you PvP against somebody that has one of these, you'll probably just get one shot, so on a PvP server, it's not going to be fun to play against. As far as my own interpretation of this new survival mode, I'm really excited for it, again with the big caveat that they don't allow characters to carry over, or at the very least, give us a separate matchmaking setting. Make it so if I want to play with people who just have characters on the survival mode servers that I can. I really like these new death mechanics. I think the respawn mechanics, such as how you can only respawn at Vault 76 or your camp, will just be frustrating. Like, I understand why they do it, but it'll honestly probably just lead to you actually respawning at your camp, then immediately fast traveling back to wherever you were. I feel like it's not the most ideal solution to that problem, but I personally can't think of a better one. And further, maybe one other radical change I'd like to see with this mode, in addition to it requiring a totally separate character, make it so you can actually get legendary weapons, or alternatively even just increase the time to kill between two players, make it so you actually have to have gunfights. In Fallout 76 right now, a lot of the times the PvP is immensely one-sided, like you'll just get one shot or you'll one-shot them. Very rarely do I actually have some exchange between me and my enemy. In the article, they also mention how they'll have that same level scaling system for combat. So if you're level 100 and someone that's level 10 walks up to you, he still has a chance at taking you down because PvP damage is normalized, and that's getting carried over for survival mode. If they're maintaining that, maybe just kind of lower it a little bit so you don't instantly get one shot all of the time, which is one of the big questions I actually have about this mode is how are they going to not make it super punishing? I'm obviously not as rich as certain players in Fallout 76, but one of my big gateways to PvPing is the fact that I don't have enough caps. In Fallout 76 right now, some of the times I just don't PvP or avoid taking over somebody else's workshop because I can't afford it. I spend a ton of caps fast traveling around most of the time trying to get cool locations for videos, and maybe it's my own fault for not trying to go out of my way to farm caps, but I feel like that shouldn't necessarily be a big barrier to PvPing on a survival focused server. I think losing items such as your aid items to the point where you literally have no more could be a much better one. Even further, with this new survival mode, there's several features they never actually talked about that I'm pretty curious as to how will work. Like, will you still be able to see everyone on the map at a given time? That would be a very questionable thing in a PvP server. But at the same time, for two groups that want a PvP, it would be cool if there was some method of kind of nudging you in the right direction. Fallout 76 has a really big map. And maybe if there's like, all right, this area is where you can go when it's a wilderness zone, or you will appear on the map, that would be kind of cool. Or maybe the hunter versus hunted radio will be used more prominently. I don't know, there's several ways they can improve on this. And then finally, you have to assume other components like being wanted won't be in this. I also am kind of bummed out that it's not coming out till March, but at the same time, I am very excited for this. I think it's going to be a really cool mode, and hopefully we find out more about what's going to get added to it in the future. As I mentioned before, this is just Phase 1, which makes me curious as to what they have in store for Phase 2 or even potentially Phase 3. Through data mining, people have found that in the files of Fallout 76, you could find references to PvP arenas or even team deathmatch mode on the load screens. Perhaps that too could somehow find a way to tie in. Either way, moving on, for those of you who are not maybe the most thrilled about this, who don't like the PvP of Fallout 76 at all, so this server won't appeal to you, and one of those comments I referenced earlier, the same community manager actually also mentioned, we're also seeing the thoughts being shared by those of you who'd like to see more PvE content, and while I can't spoil any details just yet, I will say that survival mode won't be the only new content coming to Fallout 76 in March, so stay tuned. Either way, in the same article, they go on to talk about the next patch coming to Fallout 76. They mention how they're still shooting to get this patch out by January. We don't actually have a date yet, but obviously at some point in the next week, but they do say they are swatting another massive round of bugs with this patch, so hopefully that means it'll be comparable in size to the December 11th or January 10th patch, each of which seemingly took on over 100 bugs. But they also say they're going to be implementing a number of changes based on feedback that players have given. I'm pretty interested to see where they go with this. In the previous Inside the Vault article, Bethesda actually mentioned how since the game is getting relatively bug-free now and a lot of those launch bugs are getting squashed, with future patches we're going to see increasing amounts of balance changes or other changes to the game, not just fixing a bug. As far as some actual changes they do mention, they're adding in a known tag for plans you do know. This should be pretty cool. If you're on PC right now, not too long ago, I actually covered a mod that adds this in anyway. but it should be a pretty big quality of life improvement for a lot of us. Even further, the traveling pharmacy perk will now correctly reduce the weight of Radaway and other chems. This is a bug that's been there since literally day one of the beta, so I'm pretty happy to see it get released. Unfortunately, it took 3 months, but hey, better late than never. And then several other things that aren't as big of changes. Since the January 10th patch, there have been some serious server instability problems. I don't have a ton of footage of it, but I've just been crashing more. Whether it be the server disconnecting, the server being really laggy, or even just a flat out crash to desktop with no error message, no freezing, just, oh, nope, that's it. And then one final note that's pretty interesting. I do have an update to Duper's getting banned. Over the past couple of weeks, Bethesda has certainly been making an effort to actually get dupers banned, and it has been fairly widespread at this point. It certainly isn't massive. I would say more than half of people who have duped remain unbanned, but they're getting their numbers up there at the very least. Well, it seems like, assuming this email isn't fake, which it is possible, but I don't have any reason to believe it would be faked, you actually do have some methodology of recourse. I received this from somebody who was banned from duping, but then basically responded with an apology, and Bethesda responded with this email, saying, "Thank you for your response. At this time, we will further investigate this appeal with the information you have provided. And then depending on the results of that investigation, we may take one or more of the following actions. Issue a final warning, remove items created by an exploit, delete all the characters on the account, or permanently deactivate the account." This is pretty interesting because right now, it seems like the vast majority of people banned for duping got the final thing, that being permanently deactivation of their account, making it so they have to rebuy the game to play. Obviously, just getting the items deleted or even just getting a character deleted is a much lesser punishment. Again, take this with a grain of salt. This email could have been faked, although I don't personally subscribe to that belief. Even further, actually asking this guy how he got banned or how extensive was his duping. He said he only duped a couple of items as well as only did crafting on the smaller side. He's not one of the people that had 10 million carry weight as per his own report. So perhaps for dupers that didn't do things as extensively or as widespread, Bethesda will take a lighter stance, not completely wiping or banning that account, but maybe just deleting your character or taking those items out of your inventory. Either way, I think this is very interesting. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions and thoughts on all of this in the comments down below. And just as a note as to why I pulled this video yesterday, first and foremost, it was kind of rushed. I wasn't super happy with the quality of the video overall. Effectively, Bethesda had released the news of this new survival mode, and I had like 2 hours to film and edit a video before I had class, but even further, it got destroyed by YouTube's algorithm, getting significantly less views than any other video I had posted anytime recently. The frustrating part is, there's several reasons I can speculate as to why this happened. Maybe it was some of the words I used to get flagged for being kind of an adult video, or even alternatively, it could have been because sometimes if you reuse footage or if you use footage from previous videos, it could create an issue. Either way, I just want to start from the ground up, and hence we have this video that's much longer, goes much more in depth, and I'm much happier with. But before we end things up, I do want to share today's psychology fun fact of the day, and that's going to be on, well, psychology, but also kind of philosophy and some of the other sciences. So if you're a science major in college, or even if you've taken certain science classes in undergrad, you'll probably realize something kind of interesting about the famous scientists. When you're talking about scientists from the 16 to like the 1800s, you'll realize there's something interesting there. There's a lot of overlap between the people's findings. Take for example like Aristotle. You probably heard of that guy, but you might not actually know what he did. Well, he did a ton of things. He was one of the first people to actually approach biology from an empirical standpoint, running experiments, trying to come to scientific conclusions on his works. But even further, it's several contributions to logic, mathematics, and several other areas. He was a pretty influential figure. And you hear a lot about this when you talk about some of these older philosophers or scientists, whatever you want to call them. One of the big reasons for that, especially with psychology, is back then there was no difference between philosophy and psychology. The two were intermingled, along with many other sciences. So when you actually learn about some of the starting outs of like psychology, for example, you'll learn about people that were famous mathematicians like Descartes. If you're taking a math class, you probably have heard of Descartes at least somewhat, but he's also one of the first people to actually look at the difference between the mind and the body. He posed the mind-body problem, which is one of the really important influences in early psychology, basically saying, all right, we got like physical components in the body, but then you have the mind. You can't see the mind, but it affects all the physical things. How is that interaction occurring? But yeah, pretty interesting. It's crazy how much intermingling there was of all these different sciences way back then, where one person was immensely influential in several different fields. Obviously today that's much more split up. Philosophy and psychology don't have nearly as much overlap. Otherwise, as always again, I thank you all for watching. Hopefully you found this video informative, and with that, I hope to see you guys all next time. Later.